the goal of this, remember, is to teach you to build good habits. And that completely fulfills the goal of teaching you to write consistently during the semester, build good habits for writing, see if this daily writing thing works for you, if it creates better fiction. That's the goal. As long as you're fulfilling the goal, like the nuts and bolts don't bother me as much. And you know, if you get to the 50,000, and you do your reading in class, you're basically getting an A in the class. That's the way I set this up, because the first couple years I tried to grade the finals very rigorously and base a lot on the final, but I don't think that teaches the right lesson. Basically, if we look at it historically, there'll be one or two of you who are writing publishable material right now. If I were to base your grade on that, that would not be right. At the same time telling you, yeah, you're doing great work, here's an A, when, you know, your work is years off from getting published, then that's also somewhat doing you a disservice. And so I've transitioned to the goal of the class is not to get you published. The goal of the class is to give you all the information you would need and to teach you good habits. And so if you meet the goals of the class, then I'm going to give you the A. And I used to worry really a lot that, you know, everyone would end up getting A's and they get mad at me or something. They never have. They don't even look at it. Plus, my class is filled with grad students and PhD students and things. They're going to have to put up with the fact that a lot of really dedicated people take this class. And so I have no problem giving the entire class A's if you all do that. Now, if you don't hit the 50,000, I'm probably not going to give you a horrible grade unless you just don't try at all. If you do have made a serious try and a serious effort, if I can look through your words and, you know, things like that, I will still give you a decent grade. Someone who tries really hard, you're probably going to end up getting a B. If you don't try very hard at all, then you'll probably get lower than that. But that's kind of how I've gone to grading this class. So, in other words, do your readings, come to your writing group every week. That gives you a big chunk of it. If you want a guaranteed A, hit your 50,000 words. And that's how I do it. Any questions?
Did you have any tricks when you were an aspiring writer to keep yourself motivated to write?
Yeah, I actually will keep track of word counts even still. Say, okay, how much did I do today? And I'll do it across the week. I'll actually also do it in an Excel file. Because what that'll tell me is it'll give me a way to gauge my progress. This is how many hours I wrote, this is how many words I wrote, and this is that gives me the words per hour. And I know for myself what a good day's writing is, what a weekday's writing is, and I can usually gauge by that, looking across the week to see if I've been goofing off and things like that, or if I've been dedicated. It just helps keep me motivated. The numbers work real well for me.
How do you turn off your internal editor?
I have a lot of practice knowing what I can fix in post, and I have a lot of practice of trying to revise a chapter and having that kill my momentum through the book, so that when I move on, it stops me. And so I don't go back and revise unless it's really a big deal, meaning it's going to kill my momentum worse to not have this fixed. And for me, that generally means unless a character is not working, I just keep going, and I will leave myself notes. It often helps at the top of a chapter. Three asterisks followed by, okay, this is what I'm changing for this chapter. This is what I'm trying out. Here's something new, and then write that chapter that way, and see if I like it. And that might help for you. Even if one of my characters isn't working, sometimes I'll say, 3 asterisks, here I'm trying this personality for this character in this chapter, chapter 7. And I'll try it and see if I like it. And if I do, I'll do it for chapter 8 and chapter 9, and then I'll be like, okay, I'm getting a feel for this character. By then, your momentum is enough that you'll be like, okay, I can go fix the first chapters later on. Let's just keep going. However, a lot of times I get to the end of chapter 7 and say, that didn't work as well. I actually like the old character. I'll go back to it for chapter 8, or I'll try something new for chapter 8. And leaving notes like that to yourself can really help you, because you're not worried that you're going to forget to revise it because all the notes are there, and you can try new things out and experiment, particularly important for this class, where I'm forcing you to kind of keep going forward. And so try out new things for a chapter. Say, this chapter I'm going to really try being more visual or more sensory, using all 5 senses and things like that for my descriptions. Put that asterisk at the top, and when you get to it, see if you can tell the difference in your revision. It can be really helpful to you. Other questions, concerns, things? Travis?
Does it, even after writing for a long period of time, does it always feel like a challenge? Or does it get very much easier? Or do you feel like you're always pushing yourself and challenge?
I think it got easier for me the first few years and then leveled off. It's about the same level of difficulty, would be my guess for myself.
Okay.
Other questions?
To add to that question, so about how many words have you written once you sort of leveled off? How many words?
I would say by... See, it's kind of an interesting process. Early on, I was just so like, gung-ho, yeah, writer, fun, woohoo! I wasn't even paying attention to revisions and things like that. I was just going. And it started to become a challenge, I'd say, at about book 3 or book 4, which is where I transitioned from, yay, gung-ho, fun, to, wow, I'm going to really treat this like my job, and I'm going to keep doing it even past the honeymoon period. And I would say by the end of book 3, 4, so going into book 5, I had then basically stabilized. I still don't like revisions. I like moving on to the new thing, but I'm better about them now. That's still the part of the process I hesitate on the most. All right, let's talk today. Last week we did a craft focus lesson, so I think we might do a business focus lesson this week. People tend to get very interested in these, so let's talk about agents. All right, let's do some agent discussion. What are agents? Somebody tell me what an agent is. What your perception of one is.
They're sort of representative of the author with the publishers.
Okay, yeah. What else? What's your perception?
They do all the dirty dealing and messing with contracts and getting stuff, and talking about all the money.
Okay, yeah.
Seems kind of like talent scouts. They're trying to find new talent
Okay.
and get them out there.
Yeah, those are each big parts of what an agent does. An agent in the literary world is very different from Hollywood agents, though they do a lot of the same work. I found that literary agents tend to be the same sort of people who would become editors. If you mix into that mix a little bit more of a desire to argue. That's sort of a little bit more of that personality, a little bit more willing to be the person who goes on the author's behalf, the advocate, and things like that. And so the big parts of what an agent does, and this is why you would consider getting one, is number one, they know contracts. They are one part attorney. T-T-O-R-N-E-Y. There's none in there. There's a U too. Oh, U-R-N-E-Y? No, there's not a U there. Lawyer. There. One part lawyer, because they do know contracts, contract law specifically, and one of the things about contracts, and we may get into talking about contracts today, we may save that for another day. Contracts are filled with this sort of precedential language. Anyone here law student or pre-law? Okay. You can correct me if I get some of the terminology wrong, because I am not an attorney, and none of this is legal advice. Yeah, he laughs at that, because that's what you're supposed to say. But there's a lot of language. You'll see like one sentence in a contract, and this sentence will have a history to it. That it means this and this and this, and it's been challenged several times in courts and upheld, meaning this. Reading it, you'd have no idea that it means all that, that using these 3 words together means a certain thing. But to everyone in the industry who knows contracts, that's what they mean. And so,
Can you give an example of that?
no, because I pay someone to do this for me. We're in the middle of when we're in the middle of negotiations, he'll point to them, say, that's what this means. I guess I can give one. There are things called like a best faith clause. We'll make like reasonable efforts to make sure that your cover desires are met. And whatever the certain language they use will mean that they have to like actually make a few changes when you suggest it and show it to you again, and then they can ignore what you say after that. That's legally what it means, or things like that. A lot of it's stuff like that. Cover consultation clause. They have to show it to you before at a certain stage in the process. It doesn't say what stage there. It just says, the cover. You'll have a cover consultation clause. You get cover consultation, which means that before they actually go to the final version of the cover, while they still have sketches, they have to show it to you and then ignore what you have to say about it. These sorts of things are what an agent knows and does. It's a big part of their job. A lot of these have to do with rights issues, meaning when the rights on the book revert to you, what rights you can then resell and which ones you can't resell. And it can get very sticky if some of the language is not specific, and particularly if it's not specific in specific ways, so that they can have something to argue for to try and, for instance, a publisher might be able to argue that they then have T-shirt rights to your book because of the way that 3 words are worded. And you just want to make sure, they probably would never do that, but you want to make sure that it's not worded in such a way that T-shirt rights are then given to the publisher or whatever. That's what the agent will do. In 75% of these cases, because authors are the talent in their respective in our fields, the clauses aren't going to matter that much, because even if there's a little ambiguity, the publisher is not going to want to risk offending the talent, meaning the author, in order to pull something off. Just like in Hollywood, generally the actors are going to be the last people they try to offend, and the writers will be the first people that they kick out to the curb, because the writer's name does not sell movie tickets, but the actor's name does. In the same way, your name sells books, and so therefore they're generally not going to try and work some of these little things. But it is good to have an agent looking at them. There are some big things that some publishers will try to work, and usually it has to do with royalties. Usually it does not have to do with rights. It has to do with royalties, and it has to do with first refusal rights on books and things like that. We'll talk about all that stuff. But anyway, if the concept of reading a contract and dealing with this sort of thing makes your brain break, an agent may be a good choice for you. You can do this yourself. If you have just enough business or law background to ask, what does this clause mean? Can we define this clause? And that sort of thing. Most everything is straightforward enough once you get a certain minimum level of legalese under your belt that you could do this yourself. I don't know if I'd recommend it, but if I had some law background, or even, like I said, some business background, I might consider it.
Say you started talking with an editor or a publisher, and you were looking at the contract and you weren't certain, could you still bring in an agent to have them look
Yes,
at it?
you could. Though, a lot of people would suggest at that point that you hire an IP attorney, an entertainment lawyer. Because you can, if you want, there are basically 3 routes to go on this if you want to do it. 1 is agent. 2 is IP lawyer. 3 is yourself. Yeah. And agents take 15% of everything. I wrote that wrong. 15% of everything. All right? IP lawyer is just you pay them and then they're done. It's an out-of-pocket expense. It can be fairly big. Not mondo big, but a couple $1,000 to negotiate a contract is about the upper end of what you're looking at. $500 to $1,000 is probably more normal, I would guess. Joshua and I have used an IP attorney once on a contract that we felt had extra level of craziness going on. We just hired someone else to do it. Yourself is free, except for time and headaches. So, the agent's 15% clause. That means as long as that contract is in force, they get 15% of everything that contract earns. Okay? And so, if you leave that agent, or if that agent dies and someone else in the agency inherits their contracts, they still get 15% forever for the length of the contract. All right? So that's a big chunk you're giving up.
Which is how long?
It depends on the contract. Usually with books, there's going to be something we call a reversion of rights clause. You get the rights back if the book stops selling a certain number of copies. However, with the advent of digital publishing, that minimum threshold is so much easier to meet. 10 years ago, it would be, it has to sell 100 copies in a quarter, which doesn't sound like many, but they have to keep it in print and in bookstores to sell 100 copies a quarter. And that gets really hard for a book that's just not selling very well, and so they let it lapse out of print, and then you get the rights back. Now, they don't necessarily have to do that. There's been lots of argument over reversion of rights clauses with ebooks. They don't have to do the shelving on bookshelves if it sells a minimum number of copies. As long as you are known well enough that it does, then digital copies, then it stays at the publisher. So yeah, that's something to consider. We bought back the rights for Alcatraz because even though they were not keeping them very well in bookstores, there was enough interest because I'm a big enough author that people were ordering them off of Amazon and finding the books, even though they basically weren't in print anymore, that they were selling enough to meet the rights reversion clause, that it would never have reverted to me. They would have sold for the next 40 years. And so we just bought them back. And so, yeah. Okay, so number one, contracts. This is a pretty big deal. And it's worth considering. There are a lot of authors nowadays, particularly some of the sort of mid-listy authors, who are arguing for this more and more, rather than giving someone 15%. If you want to read people who advocate this, one of the big people who talks about this would be Joe Conrath, I think, has talked about it, and Dean Wesley Smith and his wife, Kristen Catherine Rush. Did I get her name right? Say Kristen? Something like that. I've never actually met them, but they both run blogs, and they're very vocal on them. They are, there's like this kind of choose your side going on thing in publishing right now, indie versus traditional publishing. A lot of people fall in the middle somewhere, but a lot of people fall in either camp. The blogs I just mentioned are like way over here. They're like the libertarians of indie publishing, okay? So just keep that in mind. They advocate one side to all of this that is worth reading and knowing about, but they are very extreme in their attitudes. For instance, Dean has several times said, stepped right up to the line of calling all agents crooks and thieves, and saying that no author should ever use an agent. I don't think he's actually stepped across that line and called them that, but he's right at the edge of it. He always makes the caveat for there are some good agents out there, but just be aware of that. Yes.
Can you write those names down?
You assume I could spell them? Hey, Mark, you want to come in?
Is there room?
Yeah, there's a chair right here if you want it. Yeah. All right, let's see. Dean Wesley. So I have to actually spell it so you guys can read it rather than my normal scribbly thing. Dean Wesley Smith and J.A.C. Conrad? K. Conrad. Does anyone know? K Conrad. A-O-N-R-A-T-H. Okay? Both are interesting resources that if you're at all interested in this, you should be reading. I really do think. With the caveat that I mentioned to you, all right? I think a lot of what they say is interesting, but too extreme. However, I'm on the other side. I'm part of the publishing establishment. Establishment has treated me very well. And Joe Conrad has a story that he was a kind of a mid-list thriller writer that never felt he was getting the attention from his publisher that he deserved. A lot of his books went out of print, something like a dozen, maybe more. You'll have to read his blog. Went out of print. And so he started putting those out-of-print ones up as ebooks. And people they just took off. People loved them. And so he started writing new ones and putting them up without going to the publishers. And he became a huge phenomenon writer. As a thriller writer, he posts his statistics. He makes... he probably is making as much as I am in a year, if not a little more, doing self-publishing. And so that's pretty good. So he's one of the big poster boys for, yes, you can do this. Is that? So that's worth looking at. All right, where was I? Oh, I'm over here on agents. All right, so we'll talk more about this stuff. The number 2 thing that agents do is agents have contacts. So contracts and contacts. Wonder if we can make the third one start with a C. They have contacts at the publishing houses. The way it is historically said that it works is that all of this stuff that I talked about 2 or 3 weeks ago about going to conventions, the agents do. They meet all the editors. They know all the editors in your genre by name. They've probably had dinner with most of them. They know who has published what. They have huge, extensive amounts of research on all the things I told you that you should start doing, which you should. They have it all, and they have it on a level that it would take you years and years and years of effort on your own to obtain. And so when a book comes in, they are able to say, aha, this editor at this publishing house, this one, this one, this one, are exactly ideal people for these books because of such and such and such and such. They can write a cover letter that pitches the book perfectly to that specific individual and send it to them personalized by saying, hey, I am such and such agent. You know me. It's more like, hey, Jill, I have this great author for you, and the last one I sent you became a multi-million-dollar bestseller. I think this one will do the same thing. You should look at it. When an agent does that, then the editor looks at it. And so having a good agent means that the moment you have one, you don't have to worry as much about that little black book full of things. I had people pull away here so you can go sit on the floor. That isn't to say that you should stop. You really should keep doing it and learning your industry because it is your business. However, you have at that point someone who really does know the business far better than you probably do at this point in your corner, so to speak. An IP lawyer cannot do this and will not do this. So if you do not use an agent, you've got to do it yourself. And that requires a lot of effort and work. I did this part all myself. And got an offer from Tor without an agent. So it's very viable to do it. But you can probably see how having an agent would be advantageous to you. Now, the counter argument that is made by those who... Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I just have a question. Once you had your in with Tor, and they probably would have accepted more books from you, why did you then choose to get an agent?
Oh, I'll go there. That's a good question. Don't let me forget that one. So, The argument on the other side is that some people feel that agents, instead of doing all that, pick a few favorite editors and just basically send everything to them without personalizing or targeting, and not distributing the book as widely as you might have if you had the opportunities. And there's also the argument that they have less incentive to argue for that extra $2,000 when you're a new author. So that extra $2,000 only means to them a couple $100, and it's more worth their while to just get the quick comp deal and sell the quick deal, and then move on and do a lot of those. That's the argument on the other side. A good agent won't do that, but the argument is that the people who don't like agents are feeling that that's what a lot of agents are doing. So that's a decision you'll have to make for yourself. And you really, if you do go with an agent, you want them to be submitting widely. You want them to be sending you all the places they submit and all the rejection letters. They should be doing that automatically. And that way, if you have your book, black book of all the editors, you can add to it, and you can also see, did this agent send it to 3 people, or did they send it widely to the 15 that I would have sent it to? Did they target it specifically, or did they just kind of go with people that, looking on their list, that they sell everything to? If you're up on the business, you really should be being proactive about this, even if you do have an agent. You can keep an eye on this and see how your agent's doing.
You answered.
Okay. So, yeah. Number 3 that an agent does is advocate. Breaking my alliterative list there. Your advocate. Having an agent means that when you're dissatisfied with something at your publisher, you don't have to call up your editor, with whom you should have a good relationship, a nice, friendly, working relationship. You should be able to if you have an agent, you call your agent and say, I'm mad about this. Make them understand how mad we are. And the agent then becomes a real pain in the neck. A super big pain in the neck. Good agents are experts at being pains in the neck. We don't like our cover. We didn't like the Misc paperback cover. They changed from the hardcover to the paperback for whatever reason. We hated it. Sales on it were very, very lukewarm. We, meaning my agent, screamed and yelled about it for like 6 months until they finally relented and put on a new cover, which then sold very nicely. I'm extremely glad I had Joshua do that, because I don't know that I would have been able to do that. What's that?
I just bought it. I wondered which cover is the good one.
The old one has been out of print for 4 years. If it has a Grim Reaper on it, then it's the old one. Grim Reaper.
The library has a copy of that.
Yeah. Yes, I know. Yep. So, it does not make any sense. It's supposed to, I think, be an Inquisitor, but it's got a side and a big hooded cloak, I think. So, anyway, having an agent to argue these things for you can be really nice. Again, if you have a legal background and that sort of thing, if you're good at arguments, and you know how to argue in a way that does not offend but gets your point across, you could do this all yourself. It's probably the easiest one of the 3 to do yourself if you have the right personality.
Do agents also take care of like foreign rights and issues?
Yes, I will get to that, because there's a couple of other things here. Yes?
Are agents worried about offending when they're arguing?
No, because everyone in the business understands that an agent's job is to be a pain in the neck. And they're basically given a pass on being a pain in the neck. They can't go too far, but they know how to be a pain in the neck without being insulting. That's and there's a distinction there. I would have a very hard time ever saying to a publisher, unless you give me this, I will walk. But my agent can say, Brandon might walk if I go back with this offer. All right. So other things. These are the kind of the big three that people look at. Though number 4 is still pretty big. Translation rights. Translation rights. Very difficult to sell in foreign markets without an agent handling it. The big agencies will all have deals with foreign agents, and they will sub-license your books for you in foreign markets. I'm in like 24 or something. Early in your writing career, this is a really big deal because early in your writing career, usually, unless your book goes to auction, we'll talk about that, and it sells for a ton, usually your initial contract is going to be such that it's a little bit hard to make ends meet with it. Like even if you get, let's say you get a really good contract and it's like 60 grand for your book, which is a pretty solid amount of money. That's usually going to be half on signing, 1/4 on acceptance of the manuscript, and 1/4 on publication. So that's $30,000 your first year, 15 the next year, and 15 the next year. Okay? That, I'm sure, to some of you, because when I was first getting this, that sounded like a ton of money. Because I was working for like $8 an hour, and I'm like, wow. But that's a 60 for a first book is actually a really solid deal. Most of them are going to be different than that. I got 10. Okay, 5 on signing, $2,500 on acceptance, $2,500 on publication. It was the Lantris and Misc board. So it was actually 20 on signing. Or no, it was 10 on signing because I got half for the contract, and then the rest was strung out across the next few books. So surviving then on basically 10, 2,500, 2,500, 2,500, 2,500. That's not very much money, even if you're a single dude living in your friend's basement, as I was. The 10 sounded fine. After that, it got a little sketchy. However, a lot of these translation rights can be decently lucrative. I think initially, my agent then took it and sold like Spanish rights, and that was like $1,500, and then sold Russian rights, and that was $1,500, and then sold like German rights, and that was actually like $2,500, and things like this. And most of these, are paying out either half on signing, half on publication, or just all on signing. And so you get a dozen of these, and they each pay you $500, and you're doing all right suddenly. And if you're in the $60,000 range, suddenly they're, instead of paying you $500 on signing, suddenly you're getting like $1,500 to $2,000. And so you can see, particularly early on, these translation rights can really mean a pretty big chunk of change comparatively to your American rights, and can keep you afloat. Yes?
How do they compare next to the 15% that the agent's taking on?
Usually foreign rights are 20%. 10% to your U.S. agent who handles making the contracts, and then 10% to the foreign agent who is negotiating with the publisher over there.
How does this work if a book exceeds expectations? Isn't that the advance where you're at?
Yeah, this is all advance.
Okay.
Oh, you gave them to me. I should be throwing these away. Oh, yeah, you want one? Okay, go ahead.
Is it possible to sell foreign rights before you sell your book in the U.S.?
Yes, it happens very rarely, but it does happen. The biggest, I think, recently they did it with Stephen Erickson, who I believe is Canadian and sold in the UK first. And that happens decently often. That you sell in sell in the UK first. I wouldn't say it's by any means the norm, but it can happen.
How often do books out-earn their advance?
Usually, what a book is trying to do is that an advance should be about what the book is going to earn in its first 3 years or so. Basically, it's hardcover run and it's paperback run. If the book gets picked up and becomes a perennial earner, then you'll start earning royalties. Which, if you launch a career, you probably should be doing. With a new author, unless you go to auction, it's always going to be lower than what they think the book will actually earn, because you don't have any real bargaining ground. And so 10,000 for Elantris was really the bottom end. No one thought Elantris was only going to earn 10,000. It's possible that it would, because that's kind of like the lowest books that Tor offers that kind of do only, not a flop, but this doesn't do so well, that's probably not going to be in print in 5 years. That 10,000 would be about probably what that book earns. And so that's what they could offer. They actually offered me 5, and Joshua said, no. And I had no idea, and he got it up to 10 for 2 instead of 5 for 1. But most books by, oh boy, we're going to talk about earning out. This is a, let's put this one over here, and I'll talk about it if we have time after agents. Okay, so I don't forget. I'm not going to use, let's put a pin in that, but that's what we're doing. Okay, we don't want to go back to agents. All right, so each of these things are advances against royalties, and things do earn out, particularly if they become a phenomenon, or if for some reason it goes to auction. Dan famously sold Serial Killer for like $7,500 in the States, and $90,000 in Germany. Because the Germans latched onto it, loved it, and there was big argument, a bidding war over who wanted it. What he wrote sells really well in Germany, and so his German sale was 10 times or more than his U.S. sale. That happens. Okay, so foreign markets. Just so you know, and if you have any angle, you can work with some of these. The biggest, by far, is what we call North American. It's everything you would assume it includes, plus the Philippines. For whatever random reason. Because the Philippines used to be a U.S. protectorate or whatever it was, and so he got grandfathered in North American English rights. Okay? The second biggest is what we call World English. World English is selling the book in English anywhere else. Basically, this is going to mean the UK and Australia, but also India. Could be a fairly big thing, but also any English language bookstore in Europe is being supplied by the World English rights holder, which is usually the UK publisher. So if you go to Amsterdam, there's a nice English language bookstore right on the dam, and it's all the UK editions. They did have some American editions, but it's mostly just the UK editions. So that's pretty big. Next in line, and these two can actually flop as you have seen, is German. Germans love books. They read a lot, and it's a huge market for books. So if you served a mission in Germany, that might be an angle you can work. After that, there's another group of them that are decent without being enormous. And these include French can be good. Japanese. Chinese, which comes in both simplified, and complex. Usually rights for Taiwan are separate from rights from mainland, and that's kind of how they go down, because mainland uses simplified and Taiwan uses complex, but Hong Kong also uses complex, as I understand. So it gets kind of sticky in the Chinese rights. Who else can be big? Spanish are tiny. Sorry. Those of you who serve Spanish-speaking missions, people in South America don't really read science fiction, fantasy. Don't really read a lot. It's a really tiny market. Yes?
So these are all in order of science fiction.
science fiction. I don't know a lot for other markets, but this is basically for fantasy. That's how I'm doing it. The thing is, fantasy is one of the best-selling worldwide markets. If you guys watch movies, if you pay attention, you'll see that a fantasy film that flops in the States will often do still fantastically overseas and will often save the fantasy film. Fantasy, this is one of the places where we dominate, is for some reason, fantasy novels do translate very well. Whereas other things in the States do not always translate very well. And so, for instance, yeah, our foreign rights are very enviable to a lot of other genres. Science fiction, by the way, sells really well in Japan. Fantasy does not. Fantasy does okay. So if you're writing science fiction, Japan moves way up on this list. Those are ones to be aware of. I think everything else. I mean, there's another rung beneath this. Spanish can be okay, because I really love my Spanish publisher in Spain, but Spain is one of the poorer countries in Europe, and less discretionary income, less books being sold. It's not the best market. Scandinavian. The thing about Scandinavians is they all read in English, and so while there are a ton of readers, selling rights in something like Norwegian and stuff can be really tough because they just all read in English and they do a really good job of it. And so, selling anything, any of the Scandinavian, same as basically I found goes for Dutch. And so, yeah, Thai rights could go in here. You can usually sell as Russian. Anyway, there's a whole pile of them over in here. That even if you're a very big author, the deal is for $1,000.
Who translates them, and what role do you invest in that?
The publisher, foreign publisher, pays for the translating, and usually when they're on the ball, they will send you emails to ask questions, and you can get back to them for the translation.
I know they sometimes change the covers too. Have you ever had any weird issues with that?
No, because they basically are going to do what they want to do, and it would be too hard for me to say no. I know the U.S. fantasy market really well. I can say what a bad cover is here. I can't say what a bad cover in Turkey is, because I don't know what works for that culture. So all of my Japanese ones are all manga style, the covers. Which they're interesting to look at, but I'm like, huh? Elantris was even illustrated. It had like 10 illustrations, all of manga-style illustrations.
Do they send you copies of all the books?
They're supposed to. They don't always, but they're supposed to. So, yeah.
So if you were going to do this yourself, you'd have to contact the foreign publisher, and
Yes.
And I'm guessing they have someone that speaks English and all that.
Yeah, usually because they're going to be doing things in translation, but they read and write it better. I don't know of anybody who does this themselves. The authors that do their own just don't sell foreign rights, usually. Or the big author I know that does his own is Lee Modesitt, who was an attorney and a lobbyist and really shrewd contract negotiator, has an agent for foreign rights, only does his English language himself. So even if you go your own route, doing this on your own is really tough. So good luck. I'm sure there's someone out there who does it. But you basically have to go to London Book Fair and probably Frankfurt Book Fair every year and be meeting the publishers, because that's where they meet. Probably going to the one in Taiwan every year too, or Japan. So the amount of money you would put into flying to meet all these people would negate what you'd earn, which is why people just don't do it if they handle it themselves. Okay? There was another one I was going to talk about. Oh, where'd my pen go? Other thing that an agent can do, we're getting to some of the smaller ones, but is auction. Very difficult to hold a book auction on your own. A book auction is where, the dream version of book auction is you've got this really hot book. You're a hot agent. Everybody knows you don't send out crap. So you send to 10 top people a book that you say, all right, I will hear bids on this coming next week. If and we're going to go to auction, meaning usually what happens is they'll send it to like 2 or 3 high-powered editors saying, we're going to go to auction next week. You get to look at it early. You can preempt. I think we talked about that. Yeah, Peggy talked about preempting. And they can preempt. What that does is they then offer a really, really good deal pre-auction. And you decide to take that rather than risking where the auction could go. Because it will be, if it goes to auction and nobody makes a bid, that can happen. But if an auction does make a bid, then you can get 3 or 4 publishers bidding against one another, and they say, we'll do this for the book, we'll do this for the book, we'll do this for the book, and it can push the advance up much higher. Alcatraz went to book auction. That was more of a silent auction in that we kind of didn't do the full, here's what they bid, can you beat it? We said, we've got 3 people bidding on this, you've got 2 weeks to come up with your very best bid. And they all bid the same amount. Which Joshua actually preferred because he said, well, we can go and argue them all higher, but I feel like this is what the book is worth, and so we took it. That's something that Joshua did that I don't think many other agents would do. They may have just pushed it higher, which might have been the right move, might not have been. But whenever you hear of a new author selling a book for over $100,000, it went to auction. Every time. I can guarantee that book went to auction. It might be a really, really nice preempt, which could happen, but I bet that it was auction. And this is something that an agent can do. It's very hard to do yourself because they don't take you seriously. Imagine, you don't have the track record that the agent does, and so sending it to 10 and saying, I'm going to put this to auction, they're just going to laugh at you. But I'm sure someone out there has done it themselves before, but you'd have to have some really good angle or things like that. More likely, you're not going to go to auction on your own.
How do agents build up a track record? How do you know if you're getting one that has that?
That's a good question. And that's probably where we should go next. Is there anything I skipped? I said we're going to get to that later.
You didn't do that earning out really.
We're going to do that after the whole agent system.
Someone asked why you
Why I picked my agent. Yeah. Actually, there is one other thing. So we're going to put a pin in this question too. What was that question again?
Why you went with agent?
Mine?
Yeah.
How's an agent
Oh,
build a track record?
yeah,
How do you
getting
know
a good
you got
agent.
one like that?
Okay, we'll write those things down so I don't forget them. And let's go to, so I want to get this organized by the things the agent does before you decide, so you can decide if it's worthwhile. Number 6 on this list, sometimes an agent will do editorial. This is very common for new authors. It is also one of the things that drives the anti-agent crowd crazy, okay? And so you kind of have to decide for yourself. A lot of agents, when they pick up a new author, will say, okay, I will pick you up if you fix X, Y, and Z. We're going to do a draft together, and I'm going to see if you're capable of doing a revision to editorial demand. If you do what I say, I think it'll make a better book, and then I will pick you up. Some people really don't like this. Their opinion is the agent's job is the contract stuff, all this other stuff, and not editorial. And so that they would say that if an agent calls you and says, rewrite it to this, that you should run from that agent. The opposite argument is, well, you're getting a free edit by a hopefully professional caliber editor. Whether or not they are a professional caliber editor will depend on what you think they said about your book, how you felt about their comments, whether you think they're worth, if they're going to make the book better, that sort of thing. This is really a nebulous thing. Joshua, for instance, loves doing editorial. Every book by any of his authors, no matter how important, he gives editorial suggestions on. He does not, however, say you must change this, because that's not the agent's job. But he will give advice and feedback. I have heard stories of people getting caught as a new author in one of these things where they've been asked to revise, and they revise the book and send it back, and then they ask for another revision, and you spin your heels for years rewriting to editorial demands for somebody who can't actually publish the book. And so that's something to be aware of. And that will determine part of your relationship with your agent, whether you want someone like that. They may call and say, hey, I'm willing to pick this up. By the way, I have a few suggestions I really think you should make. They may say, I will only pick you up if you can fix these things. They may say, hey, I like this book. I'll take it and sell it. And you're going to have to really just decide what you want. Agents come in lots of flavors and styles. Some are high-powered, less personal, meaning you basically only talk to them when you have a new contract and a new book or a new book. And you say, here's the book. You send them. They may not even read the book. They may read some of it and your pitch on it and then take it and sell it. They may read the book and then take it and sell it, but regardless, they view themselves primarily as, I take this, I sell this, that's my job. You may get others who want to call you every week and be the shoulder upon which you cry and talk a lot about your business and what you're doing with your career and all these sorts of things. It's really going to depend on what type of agent you want. How hands-on, how hands-off. So, yeah.
It's not easy to change, I imagine.
It is not easy to change. Changing agents is like changing spouses. It's very similar. The breakup can be very harsh, and you will never be rid of them as long as the contract is, you can get new agent for new contracts, but the old agent will still handle all the stuff for the contracts they have worked on.
So how do you find out whether your agent's that kind of person or not? You just, no dating then, you just arrange marriage?
No, there's a bit of arranged marriage thing, though. When they call you on the phone and say, hey, you find out how well you interact with them. This is why it's so good to have gone to conventions and seen them and met them and gone to their coffee clutches and chatted with them and, all of this stuff. You can also email their authors and say, hey, this agent's thinking you're picking me up. Can you tell me a little bit about what style of agent they are? And you can interview agents. If you've got a book offer in hand, you get a little bit more versatility for picking an agent if you do want to go with an agent. Dan actually did this. He had several agents. He had the book offer from Tor, and so he went to a couple of agents and talked to them, and he went with a certain agent, and not Joshua, because Joshua's style would not have matched him, though he called and talked to Joshua.
So did you, is that how you found out about your agent?
Joshua I met at the Nebula Awards one year, doing what I've been telling you guys all to do. Mark, you know what was? Okay. And he represented a few authors that I liked, Simon Green and Elizabeth Moon, both of whose books I've read quite a bit of. And when I sent out a flock of queries, he was the only one who replied. And when I sent out books to agents and editors, he was the only one who actually responded. And so I didn't have a lot of options, but I also very much respected the fact that he got back to me. He rejected me 4 times on 4 different books. But he responded. Everyone else I got form letters from. Him I got, I think you show a lot of potential. Here's what I think is wrong with this book. This is why I'm not going to represent it. But I would like to see future books by you. I thought he was right. I never rewrote those books because I wasn't a rewriter. I probably should have. Because he was kind of lukewarm, saying, if you revise this, I'll take another look at it. But Joshua doesn't like the revise and I'll represent it. So he doesn't want to promise someone that. But I didn't know that. So I just sent him a new book. I was writing them fast. And so we'll get to this story now. Then I actually got a call back from Tor on a book Joshua hadn't seen. And I was put in the position of, do I go get an agent or not? I did not want to handle the contract things on my own. I did not want to handle the arguing with the editors on my own. Yes, I had a contract in hand. I wanted to spend my time writing instead of doing these things. And so I wanted an agent. And so I called up Joshua and I said, I have an offer in hand. Are you willing to look at the book? And he said, yeah. He read the book, he liked it, he was Elantris, and he agreed to represent me at that point. And that's really all there is to the story. I didn't want to do all that stuff on my own. Some people doing all this stuff on their own, or doing the hybrid route, where you have an IP lawyer for the contracts, where you have an agent do foreign sales, but only foreign sales, and you do everything else yourself, is really exciting to them. The other big reason that you would not want an agent is if you want to self-publish, which we'll talk about probably another day, because I don't know if we have time today. We'll see. Yeah.
This might overlap with earning out, but is it in your best interest, money aside, let's say that no matter how much your advance was, you were going to put it in the bank.
Yeah.
Is it in your best interest to get a high advance so that the publisher is more interested in your success?
Okay. It's a good question. We've got enough interest in this. We'll talk about the earning out thing. So the way that a contract will work is you will get an advance.
Brandon?
Yes.
I had a quick question back on the
Okay.
subject. That might be. I was just wondering. So, you said you called up Joshua once you had an
Yes.
offer in hand. Does it give you kind of special privileges to contact an agent when you
Have a contract in hand?
have a
Yes.
contract?
From a serious publisher? Yes. But Joshua had already started calling me at that point to give me feedback on my books, which was another big sign. I should have just been revising them. But in fact, actually no, this happened about a month before I sold. Joshua actually called me and said, what I'm doing is I'm trying to get you to revise one of these books without making a promise to you. So go fix one of them and send it back to me. He actually did that. He says, I think you're really good. I think that you're writing these books too quickly and you're not revising enough. And so yeah. Joshua's also, though, very personable as an agent, meaning he likes to be in contact with his authors. He calls every week, basically, to just touch base. He's not a cry on my shoulder agent, but he is he always wants to be in touch. So, yeah. All right, so advance. You get an advance. Your advance is against earnings. So, an advance against earnings means they pay you $1,000. Each book you sell earns you a little bit of money. Your little pot starts adding up, and they don't owe you any more money until this gets to 0, and then, of course, goes beyond it. Does that make sense? So if you have $1,000 advance, which is tiny, but you have $1,000 advance, and you earn $1 per book, which is also tiny, then you would sell 1,000 books and break even. At that point, they will pay you royalties. Royalties get paid twice a year. Okay? They get paid in May for the previous July to December. Okay? And then get paid November for January to June. It's slow. It's way too slow. But that's what happens. All right? But theoretically, if you're getting a big advance, then you're not getting royalties early on. So, big advances against royalties. Earning out is what we call when your royalties equal your advance, you have earned out. You have earned as much on the advance on the book as they paid you in advance, meaning everything evened out, and that was pretty decent. Any book that earns out is considered a success. Okay? Earning out is a success. I know I've asked you, Susan. I can remember. Earning out is a success. So that is one litmus test you can use. That if you're a new author, they're probably putting the advance at basically the lowest the book could earn out at and still be considered at least a mild success. Maybe not so much of a success that they're banging down your door to buy more, but that's going to be some litmus. One thing, though, that is kind of weird is that not earning out does not necessarily mean failure, which is a tough one to wrap your mind around. People look at the advance as, well, this is how much money the book earned. No, that's not how much, or the royalties. That's not how much the book earned. That's how much your cut of the book's earnings are. Okay? And I'll try to explain this in a way that makes sense. Certainly, if you got a small advance and you didn't earn out, that's a failure of the book. But to understand this, we kind of have to go into standard percentages. Almost everybody in the business gets something like this. Hardcover, you get 15% of the hardcover price. Okay? Paperback, you get somewhere around 8% of the cover price. Okay? Realistically, if you really want to know the basics, hardcover is usually broken down like this. First 5,000 is 10%. Second 5K is 12.5, and then everything thereafter is 15. That's how it usually breaks down. And with paperback, it's often something like 6% on first 75K, and then 8% thereafter. Trade paperback is 10%. Trade paper is the oversized paperback. Mass market is the pocket size. So that's basically how it is. You can really look at hardcover 15, though for a new author it's really more like 10, because you have to get to 10,000 hardcover sales to get to that 15. But hardcover 15, paperback 8, trade paperback 10.
What if you're already a well-known author, then?
This is the thing. This doesn't really change, okay? This is one kind of hard thing to wrap your mind around. This basically stays the same. Now, you can work it. Like, for instance, I think we now have my paperback royalties at just a flat 8%. We don't have that first escalator. And I'm sure there are people that get rid of these escalators for hardcovers. There are exceptions to the rule. I've heard that Lucas gets 22%. Because it's George Lucas, Star Wars folks. He has a huge amount of power. And because he has that, I'm sure there are some other people who are getting that. I wouldn't be surprised if J.K. Rowling level and Twilight, Stephanie Meyer level, and Nora Robertson, this level of author are pushing above the 15%. Nobody at Tor has over 15%. Nobody at Tor sells enough books to be able to break past that. Yeah.
Even in the 90s with Terry Goodkind? And
Oh yeah. Terry, gotta understand, our sales in genre fiction are like a drop in the bucket to the big authors, okay? All right? I mean, a really big book, Goodkind, as an example, Robert Jordan. No, let's use Robert Jordan. Robert Jordan's kind of top of the heap, except for George Martin right now is probably bigger, but let's say that. Opening week figures are 100,000 copies. Okay? Everybody runs out and buys this book opening week, which is why it's so big. Final sales on a book in hardcover, probably around 500,000 copies. How many did Diary of a Wimpy Kid sell in its opening days? Anyone remember? I think it was 9 million. Okay. Twilight's has sold what, 40 million copies? Okay. Compare that to science fiction and fantasy, and you will understand why none of us are breaking out of this, but they are. There's a completely different level, miles ahead of anything that epic fantasy and science fiction has ever been able to achieve. Children's is a different story. All right? So this is the realism, the realistic sort of thing. If you can really break out of that, George Martin might be there. He might have been able to manage this. I'm not sure. Hunger Games probably might be breaking out of this, but usually this isn't the place you break out of it because they're so hesitant to let these percentages change. Yeah.
Where are ebook percentages?
Well, yeah, we'll get there. I'm going to do that next. So I'll just put that there. Right now, ebooks, which are a big battleground, are hovering at 25% of net, which is very different from this. These are all based on our cover price. If a bookstore discounts it, you still get the same royalty. 15% off a Wheel of Time book is what? They're $30 books, they're like $4.50, right? Something like that. You'll get that even if they sell the book at $18 instead, because all this is tied to cover price. Ebook royalties are not tied to cover price. They are tied to net from the retailer, which is usually 70%. So you get 25% of 70%. And so most authors are arguing this is too small, and it's become one of the big rallying cries, and a pretty legitimate one, for self-publishing. So this guy, we think, will probably change, but it might not. Everyone's kind of saying 50% of that. The really good small presses that are trying to court big authors are giving 50% of that instead. Okay? So this brings us to the advance, and to Mark's question of, is it better to get a big advance or not? Bigger advances become bigger gambles. The place that people like Terry Goodkind, who sell a lot or whatnot, if they're not breaking out of this percentage model, which I don't think that they are. Of course, I haven't seen Goodkind's contracts, so there are maybe other people that have broken out of this. However, what they're doing is they're demanding enormous advances. For instance, example that I used a few years back that I think still holds. When Hillary Clinton wrote her book, she famously got $9 million as her advance. That book's never going to earn out. This is where
it's really a way of getting a higher percentage.
It's a way of getting a higher percentage by getting a huge, bigger advance. Because this kind of means she's earning a higher percentage on copies sold. But what it means for the publisher is we can safely invest this. It's an amount of money that we know, that we can quantify, and we can work it into our budget for the book. And if if she sells then 2 million copies, and she's getting standard royalties, so that turns out to be $8 million. She's got an extra $1 million. She's got a slightly higher percentage. But since this was already budgeted in ahead of time, this is not considered a failure. It just means she's getting a better percentage. But we didn't have to change the percentage numbers because doing that is dangerous in publishers' eyes. Because it's eternal. It always stays that way. So the book sells for 50 years. You've got that higher percentage rate. With this, you paid out an extra $1 million to get Hillary Clinton's name to be able to establish it. But then we don't have to worry about having to change those percentages.
How long do you earn royalties for?
As long as the book is being sold under that contract.
So once the contract expires, then you don't earn any more royalties?
Yes, but you get the rights back to sell somewhere else. And the contract usually only expires if it's not selling any copies. Yes?
So is it always better as a writer to go for a bigger advance as opposed to a smaller one and try to earn all of it back in the royalties?
Well, there's the question.
Maximizing the point.
Yeah, that's the big question. So the big thing you get there is you get a better percentage. You get this big advance. The other thing is that you, if they sink that much money into it, they are then going to match that with a larger marketing budget. It's going to the more that they're paying for the book, the more important it's going to seem. They pay, for instance, Peggy got that preemptive buyout where they offered her lead title for the book. Lead title means that she gets the full page in the catalog, and she goes first in the catalog for that month to booksellers. So when they open it up, there it is, the lead title. This is our most important book. Though secretly they actually have what they call super leads. But super leads are only established series that everyone knows what they're going to sell. So she could still be lead title, and they could be releasing the Wheel of Time book that month. Yes, the new Wheel of Time book is a more important deal than a book by a new author, but everyone understands that, and the lead title is really the, hey, you're not expecting this book, it's our lead title, it's really cool, you should pay attention to it. That's a pretty important thing that you can get, and you get that tied to usually getting a large advance. However, there's always the counter argument, which is a book that earns 20K in advance. We'll just use that as a measure. I know that advance can't be tied to actually how well a book does, but let's use it as a measure. You got paid, let's say you got paid 10K, and your advance comes out to 20K. You've doubled their expectations. They're going to buy the next book. I can guarantee they will buy that next book. Okay? What about 20K and up front they pay 100K? How is the perception of that then going to be? Will they buy the next book? No, they probably won't. So, these both earn the same amount. They even have the same marketing budget, the same lead title status. One is an author who has exceeded expectations. One is an author who has grossly under hit expectations, and their career could be over. So, which do you want to be? Well, this happening is not really that likely if they're going to put that much money into it, but it can happen. It has happened in the past. I'll tell you a story about it in a second.
Does that impact other publishers view on you? I mean, did they share that information?
That's all public record. Nielsen ratings will show how many copies the book sold. Everyone has the same royalty amounts. Advances are usually published in Variety or Publishers Weekly and things like that. So, yes, they all have that knowledge. It can make it hard for you.
So the amount of money they put in a book, does that include publicity and such?
Yes. Not this money, the advance doesn't include the publicity budget. But if they pay $100,000, then it's going to usually get a certain percentage of that year's marketing and then publicity budget. Where if they pay $10,000, it's not going to get as much, but it depends. So this is kind of a gamble. Generally, these things can be self-fulfilling. If a publisher pays $4 million for a book, and everybody knows it, it becomes its own marketing and publicity force, and it becomes a pretty big deal, and it can kind of be a self-fulfilling prophecy, if that makes sense. And so where you lie on this really depends. It's one of the reasons we did not push Alcatraz higher. We felt that we had gotten a fair offer, a large offer. Alcatraz we got 160 for 4. I didn't even have a book out yet at that point, I think. Maybe Elantris was out. In fact, I think Elantris might have been out, but it was before Misc came out. And we maybe could have pushed it higher with auction. As it stood, the book did not sell as well as Scholastic thought it would. And it didn't hit that failure level, but it kind of hit that, this sold all right. We don't know if we want to do anything more level. I think we ended up earning 125 out of that 160 so far. And so it didn't earn out, but it was a big advance. So in the end, they just kind of, by the second book, felt like, oh, these aren't earning what we want them to. And so they basically dropped the books. Said, well, we'll let whatever he sells continue to make them sell. We'll give them some minimal publicity. It's not like they treated me horribly, but their estimation of what the books could sell differed from what we thought the books could sell, and so that's why we bought them back, and we're going to relaunch them with Tor. But in that case, the big advance may have worked against me. The big advance. Those are all things you're going to have to.
Question: you mentioned that fantasy's kind of the small end compared to.
Yeah.
Does that mean for the other genres, are the advances going to be
bigger?
Respectively larger?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, we look at this. It depends. Let me give you a quick overview on this, and then we'll save the rest of it for our next business discussion. But the biggest genre out there is nonfiction. Nonfiction generally outsells fiction by a wide margin. This is because of self-help. Diet books, whatever new exercise book is out, memoirs of famous people, all of these things completely trounce fiction. Okay? Then children's outsells non-children's out of what's left. This is generally assumed because the audience is doubled, or maybe not doubled, but you know what I mean. There are a lot of people, adults and children can read them. A lot of the phenomenon books that hit are books that have the widest possible audience. And so this is why a PG or PG-13 rated movie almost always will outsell an R-rated movie, and it's because the larger potential audience group. Okay, so children's is next in line. After that is romance. Romance is sometimes children's romance. Yes, there is. You can see maybe why children's romance sells so well, like Twilight, which is basically what it is, right? It's a romance novel. Yeah.
But children's is young adult
Yes, I have to establish this. Stop thinking of children. Children is 18 and younger in publishing. I've said this over and over again. Children's is 18 and younger. Just understand that. And yeah, YA, middle grade, chapter books. Yeah. All right, so romance. 70% of readers, depending on which poll you talk to, are women. Women like romance novels. And so it generally outsells everything else. The statistics, everybody has different statistics. I can never really figure them out, but I often hear kind of the 50% model. 50% of all adult fiction sold is romance novels. So what's left, the next ones are thrillers. Thrillers are also a big percentage of the market, less than romance, but if a guy's reading a book, it's probably a thriller, generally. These are your Michael Crichtons. These are your John Grishams. Your Alex Cross, what's his name? Patterson, Tom Clancy, anybody like this that's sold as a thriller. It doesn't matter if it has science fiction or fantasy elements. Thrillers are thrillers. And it's basically, you can think of a thriller as go to an airport, turn the little turnstile. What fiction is there? Those are thrillers. Okay? So these are sometimes estimated at, of the 100% that's adult fiction, this is like 50%, and this is like 30%. I don't know if those numbers are real or not. But whatever's left over is, over here, is sci-fi fantasy, true crime, Western, horror, mystery, and everything else. So, yeah.
Question: when you sign one of these contracts, how much of your IP are you giving up? Like, are you still?
It's a good question. The answer is not very much. If you have a good contract, this is one of the things where the publishers, some publishers will try to kind of take advantage a little bit. They will try a rights grab, and basically, here's what we'll do. Why don't we? We're out of time. So next time we do a business lesson, which might actually be in 2 weeks, because I usually try to do craft alternating with it. It might be 3 weeks, but next time we do it, I want you guys to write down that question, which is let's explain contracts. Okay, so tell me to explain contracts with an eye towards IP management, and also how to get a good agent. And I'll address those two questions first during our next business lesson. If I'm on the ball, I'll actually bring you guys contracts to look through so you can kind of see, and we'll explain some of the big clauses in contracts so you can be familiar with them and that sort of stuff, okay? We'll also talk self-publishing during one of these. So that'll be a separate lecture probably.